Hi everybody, Dr. Vardy here. In this brief instructional video, I want to talk to you guys about responding to student reflective writing with an eye toward the final reflective project that we assign in our general education comp courses here at Wayne State. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about using dialogic scaffolding to support students in their growth in their reflective writing all throughout the semester, not just leaving it to the end of term. So in this video, I'm going to talk through a brief mini lesson covering some of the theoretical groundwork that upholds what I'm arguing here. And then I'll show you an example from my own teaching life. So let's get right to it. Okay. So let's talk about using dialogic scaffolding in reflection response. First of all, what is dialogic scaffolding? It sounds like a really fancy term. It just means using dialogue to scaffold or iteratively support, right? I think we use the term scaffolding a lot in pedagogical conversations, and especially if you haven't practiced it before, you may be sort of nodding along going, yes, scaffolding, what is that? Well, if you think about literally like the scaffolding on the side of a building that's supporting workers as they move up the construction project, that is exactly the image that we're evoking here. Literally, scaffolding is supporting our students iteratively throughout the semester in learning tasks, right? So this is a very fancy looking diagram here from Rogoff's modeling of scaffolding. But the important thing that I want you to notice is that from the beginning, so that's toward this side of your screen, the arrow of scaffolding, of the instructional support coming down on the curve of student learning, that arrow is really big because when we start out with scaffolding, we often are scaffolding a lot, really supporting students as much as we possibly can. And then if you'll notice, as it goes throughout the time span with those arrows, those scaffolding arrows get smaller and lighter as it goes on. So the idea is we're trying to scaffold learning for students in such a way that we are not completely holding them up the entire time. We're giving them progressively less and less and less explicit supports as the semester goes on. So I want everyone to take heart. If you find at the beginning of the semester that you're doing a lot of work in supporting your students' learning, you should be able to see them iteratively improve to the point where you're not giving as much direct instruction or intervention by the end of the term. What does that mean, right? What is the scaffolding ways? What are ways that we can scaffold learning for our students? So these are some means. I'm pulling this out of Van de Poel, and the last one, number 12, is from Wood et al. Means of scaffolding that we see often in pedagogical contexts. So giving feedback, which involves the teacher giving the student, like, this is that formative assessment. How am I doing? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this a good thesis statement? Is this a bad thesis statement? Feeding back, like, yep, ding, continue on. No, Those like sounds that I just made are feedback sounds. They either signal ding, you got it right, or you got it wrong. So feeding back is kind of a quick process. It lets a student know I'm on the right track, I'm not on the right track. Providing hints. This is stuff that can happen verbally or in writing, but this is providing those clues that sort of like guide a student onto the correct path. Direct instruction, you are literally telling the students what to do, or explaining what is the information that students need to be able to do this task in the right, quote unquote, way, the way that you are going to be evaluating them. Modeling, this is something that we're really familiar with in writing studies because we talk a lot about using writing, using model texts to show students moves that are working, how writers are actually making the moves that we are expecting students to make themselves. Questioning, this is one of my favorite ways to scaffold for students because it gives a lot of power back to the student to respond to your questions, but this sort of inquiry helps drive the student along that path. And then marking critical features. So this is something that is really comfortable for us in the teaching of writing because we mark critical features in student writing all the time. So when we think about scaffolding, doing all of those moves for student reflective writing, we can think about some really key places to scaffold student reflective writing. The first step is before the students even write. This is the development of prompts. And here we can see those scaffolding moves of instructing, directly telling a student what you want them to do, and explaining, providing the details that they need to do the task appropriately for the evaluation. Now, I'm going to show you an example of one of my reflective prompts, and you can go more or less detailed depending on your purpose, but we'll talk about that in just a second, because the second thing is considering the rhetorical purpose of the reflection that you want students to do. Now, in previous instructional videos, I've talked a little bit about this. Yancey has a seminal triad of different types of reflection that have coordinating reflective purposes. If you haven't read the Nancy reflection essay yet, go ahead and do that. She has a whole book on it also where she followed up in much more detail. But the rhetorical purpose of any reflection you're having students do is really key because it's going to determine the models, the examples that you show them, and it's going to determine how you give them feedback. Is this a reflection where you want them to just be doing a certain type of thinking? Is this a reflection where you want them to be articulating certain learning outcomes in a particular way? Is this a reflection that is aimed at a particular audience? These are questions that we as teachers will find incredibly helpful to guide us as we're giving response to student reflective writing. And then as we respond to this written reflection, this is where we use those other scaffolding strategies of giving that feedback, providing those hints, posing questions, and marking the critical features of good reflective writing or growing reflective writing. Specifically, a study that we did a couple of years ago now demonstrated to us some of the key features of really strong student reflective writing. And what we found is that reflective writing with all three of these features was consistently assessed at the highest level from multiple different assessment teams. So reflective writing that provides a summary or a narrative or a say back. This is the most common type of reflective writing that we see from students. And sometimes this is the only level that they are at. It's like, here's what I did. I did this, and then I did this, and it was good. So the summary has to be there because students do need to be able to articulate a narrative of what they did in their writing. But the second layer is to provide specific evidence. Now, this is the level that often we only start talking to students about at the end of the semester when we're trying to gear them up for that reflective essay where they're supposed to be making an argument with their reflections. Now, that's fine, but when we save the instruction and the iterative scaffolding until the end of the semester, this is often then the only next level that students achieve is like, oh, do I have to show an example? Here, I quoted myself. See, here it is. And that's not bad, but we could be achieving so much more, as with the most strongly represented reflective writing from students additionally has an abstraction component where students are able to not only provide a narrative of what happened, provide specific evidence from that narrative, but then apply that evidence to an abstract idea, such as a learning outcome or a principle of writing. So these three features are critical features of reflective writing, strong reflective writing, that we can be looking for and responding to throughout the semester. We don't have to just do it at the end. And in fact, if we want to really strengthen the scaffolding around reflective writing, we could do a quick mini lesson with students to talk about some of these features of reflective writing. We can talk about the types of reflective writing as outlined by Yancey, for example, and then talk through some of the moves that strong reflective writing makes. Okay. So in these last few minutes here, I want to walk you quickly through an example from my own teaching life. I'm going to take you from prompt through purpose to the response for an entire reflective journal entry. And this is from one of my English 1020 courses that I taught online. So you can see here, we've got the assignment, which is DJ number 5. I just called it a digital journal because they're typing things in a computer. I don't know. It gave me a little flexibility with the types of prompts that I could present to them. In this prompt, I'm asking them for a specific number of words. I want them to engage with 2 specific prompts and a third. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But in this digital journal, I did want them to engage with some of the readings. So technically, this first prompt is more like a reading response prompt. This prompt is where I really am asking for some specific metacognitive moves. And they are metacognitive moves that the student will need to be able to duplicate both throughout the semester, but especially in that final reflective assignment. So you can see here, we're working on beginning some secondary research instruction. And so this is going to ask them to think about strategies that they use when reading difficult texts, specifically difficult because we're getting into reading these academic articles. A lot of them haven't even really tackled fully. Now you'll notice, even as I'm explaining it to you guys, I'm saying the word because I'm locking into my rhetorical purpose for even having them do this reflection. I want them to be thinking about what they're doing in the class or in the course site, as the case may be, and I want them to be connecting it to abstract ideas about strategies. So I want them to think both beyond the classroom. I'm asking them about what they read outside of school, and I want them to describe how they're using reading strategies in these difficult passages. So all of these things that I'm asking them, what do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. These 4 sentences are composed specifically to have students be thinking metacognitively about their work in the classroom, how it might connect to, say, something abstract like a reading outcome. And because it's so specific, it's one learning outcome, that reading outcome. I'm not asking them to think about all of the ways that they do all of their learning in this particular moment. I really want to narrow it down in focus so that the purpose of this becomes really clear when they're, say, looking back at their old reflections at the end of the semester, which is one of the activities that I have students do as they're prepping to write that final reflective essay. Hey, let's look back through some of your reflection journals, see if there are ideas or examples that you can pull from when you were doing that reflection in action or reflection in the moment. So that's my purpose here, and that is how I developed this prompt. I mean, prompts, this is not the most beautiful prompt in the world, and it's not even the most original prompt in the world, but I'm just kind of talking you guys through my reasoning, my rationale, if you will. Now, this is interesting. This portfolio moment, so we were doing digital portfolios for everybody at the time, and I like to do reflective portfolios at the end, which sort of helps me incorporate concepts of revision, as well as reflection, as well as connecting artifacts to the learning outcomes. That might not be your particular favorite thing to do, but I just want you to notice that out of like 15 journals, in journal number 5, I'm asking them to think forward to that final project, right? So as a teacher, both in my direct instruction and my explanation of the assignment, I'm directing, it's something that one of my mentors used to call a reflect project, right? I'm directing them to think about and reflect on what's happening in the course now, but also to project toward the future, toward that final assignment. Okay, so that's enough about that. Let's look at how I responded to a student's reflection that they wrote in response to this prompt. Okay, so like we said, this first paragraph is sort of mainly focusing on reading response. So I'm looking specifically here at these last 2 paragraphs, and I just want to show you ways that I have responded, both in just pure agreement, right? Circling and underlining things that are going well or good points that students make is just as important, whether it's in reflective writing or in their more academic writing. It's just as important to point out the things that are working, the things that are good that you can agree with, as it is to point out the things that need to be fixed, so to speak. So then here I have a great specific example that the student is giving. One thing that helps me is to take notes as I'm reading along the way. You can see my wobbly little underline because I do not know how to underline very well in the digital tools in Canvas. And here I have some text where I'm questioning. So I'm using that scaffolding means of questioning to push this writer to think, well, I gave a specific example that I take notes while I'm reading. But my instructor now is asking me, what are the types of things I annotate? So that can help push this writer to be more specific next go round. Over here, I'm noticing that the student is, again, giving us some narrative, right? Talking through what happened. I like to pause after every paragraph or so and try to ask myself questions in my head. This kind of forces your brain to make connections to the text. Excellent. That's really good. So I wanted to say that, and I wanted to use the term narrative because that's a term that I use with students in class. Here, though, I'm pushing for a few more specific examples, right? It kind of forces your brain to make connections to the text. I would love to see an example of a connection her brain made while she was taking notes. And then towards the end of this passage, she has this I don't know, it's like a cross-stitch phrase that you could put on a pillow, right? Good reading strategies make good readers. Sure. Yeah, love it. Put it on a pillow for me. But over here, I want to push her to say that less about readers everywhere and make the connection more personal to herself. So this is where I want her to be making application to her own learning, not just like readers everywhere. Down here, she's talking about how for her portfolio, again, now she's projecting toward that final project as I asked her to. She says she's going to choose her rhetorical analysis essay because I believe I examined the article to the best of my ability. Now, that's awesome. Great. This is a good choice. So I wrote that. That's a good choice for your portfolio. Now I want her to think that when she gets to the portfolio, what I'm going to be looking for is more specific explanation. What does it mean to examine an article? And what are the specific moves? So that's what I asked here. Don't mind the typos. Sorry. Typing fast. Don't always get it correct. But how do these specific moments of examining a text connect to the student's ability as a reader to fulfill that learning outcome of reading? Okay, I'm going to pull back to the full view and close out this video. All right, thank you so much for your time and attention throughout this instructional video about responding to student reflective writing using dialogic scaffolding throughout the semester. So if you have any questions about any of the things that I introduced in this video, please feel free to shoot me an email at ngvardy@wayne.edu. Otherwise, I hope you guys are having a great semester. Happy reading and happy responding. Bye, everybody.